My name is Wren Ashford, and on the day my life fell apart, I was exactly 20 years old. That fact seemed to be the only thing anyone in the room could agree on. To my relatives, my age was a synonym for naivety, for a foolishness they could exploit. To me, it was a number that felt like a lead weight in my stomach, a constant reminder of how little I had accomplished and how far I had to fall. I had been served an eviction notice from my tiny, water-stained apartment just 2 weeks prior, the consequence of my part-time job at an architectural firm disappearing overnight due to budget cuts. So, when the summons arrived from the estate lawyer of a great-grandfather I had never met, I showed up in the only respectable clothes I owned, a pair of worn black trousers and a faded blouse, feeling like a ghost at a feast. The lawyer's office was a sterile cube of mahogany and muted gold, smelling of old paper and the quiet, suffocating scent of money. I sat in a leather chair that was worth more than my entire security deposit, a stark contrast to my Uncle Robert and my cousins, Marcus and Clara. They were a flock of vultures dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, their faces masks of feigned solemnity that barely concealed the avarice glittering in their eyes. They had whispered about me before I entered, their voices like the rustle of dry leaves. I heard the words, charity case, and disappointment. They looked at me not as family, but as an obstacle, a minor procedural hurdle before the real business of carving up a fortune could begin. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, was an old man with eyes that seemed to have seen every form of human greed. He peered at us over his spectacles, his expression unreadable. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room, and began to read the last will and testament of Alistair Ashford. The man had been a myth in our family, a reclusive patriarch who had built an empire in shipping and logistics and then vanished into a self-imposed exile on the coast of Maine. My relatives had spent years courting his favor from a distance, sending lavish Christmas cards and flattering letters that went unanswered. I had sent nothing. I barely knew his name. The reading began as they expected. Uncle Robert, Alistair's only surviving son, received the controlling shares in the logistics company, a portfolio that was, as Mr. Thompson dryly stated, valued in the high 8 figures. Robert's chest puffed out, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. He shot a triumphant glance at his children. Marcus was next. He was granted the Manhattan penthouse, a sprawling apartment overlooking Central Park, with an art collection that was probably worth more than the real estate itself. He leaned back, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, already picturing the parties he would throw, the envy he would inspire. Clara received the portfolio of commercial properties scattered across Boston and a liquid trust fund that Mr. Thompson described as substantial. She gave a delicate, theatrical sigh of relief, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a silk handkerchief. Her eyes, however, were sharp and calculating as she met mine across the table. There was no sympathy in them, only pity, laced with a thick, satisfying contempt. Then, there was me. The room fell silent as Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses and turned to the final page. My relatives leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. What scrap, what crumb, would the old man have tossed to the forgotten great-granddaughter? To my great-granddaughter, Wren Ashford, the lawyer read, his voice a flat monotone. In recognition of her purported interest in structure and form, I bequeath my property on the coast of Maine, located at Cutter's Cove, along with all buildings and contents therein. A property. For a dizzying second, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe it was a small cottage, a place to live, a refuge from the eviction notice taped to my apartment door. Mr. Thompson continued, his voice unwavering. This bequest is contingent upon her assumption of all associated liabilities, including the outstanding property tax lien, which, as of this reading, amounts to $73,000.42. The hope didn't just flicker out, it was violently extinguished, leaving behind the bitter smoke of humiliation. A wave of heat washed over my face. $73,000. He might as well have bequeathed me a ticket to the moon. I had less than $400 to my name. A sound broke the stunned silence. It was Marcus, a short, sharp bark of a laugh he tried to stifle as a cough. Then Clara joined in, a high, tinkling sound that was somehow more cruel. Even Uncle Robert, the new corporate titan, couldn't suppress a smirk. "A tax lien," Clara whispered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. The old man had a sense of humor. I'll give him that. "It's a shack, Wren, a complete ruin," Uncle Robert said, his voice dripping with false concern. "It's been collapsing into the sea for 50 years. It's not an asset, it's a liability. A cruel joke. Well, if you need a little loan to cover the demolition costs, you just let us know," Marcus added, his eyes dancing with mirth. "Family helps family, after all." They were laughing at me, openly. The careful masks of grief had fallen away, revealing the ugly, jeering faces beneath. They had gotten their penthouses and their companies, and I had been handed a punchline, a debt-ridden, collapsing shack. It was perfect. It was the final, definitive statement of my place in this family. Less than zero. I looked at Mr. Thompson. His expression remained placid, but for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something else in his eyes. A glint of expectation, perhaps. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished table toward me. "The deed, the property survey, and the keys," he said softly. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it. My pride screamed at me to refuse, to throw the envelope back in their laughing faces and storm out. But where would I go? Back to an apartment where the landlord was already showing my room to new tenants. Back to nothing. This ruin, this joke, was the only thing in the world that was mine. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I clutched the envelope to my chest. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice quiet but clear. I didn't look at my relatives. I couldn't bear to see their smug, victorious faces. I turned and walked out of that suffocating office, the sound of their muffled laughter following me down the hall like a physical blow. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Not then. The tears came later, in the cold, empty space of my soon-to-be former apartment, as I packed my life into cardboard boxes. The journey to Cutter's Cove was a long, grey affair. I sold my laptop for gas money and loaded my few boxes into my beat-up sedan. The drive north felt like a retreat, a surrender. Each mile that passed took me further from the life I had tried to build and deeper into an unknown, unwelcome future. The city skyline faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by endless stretches of pine trees and the occasional glimpse of a steely, indifferent ocean. When I finally found the dirt road marked by a faded, hand-painted sign that read Ashford, it was more of a suggestion than a path. Overgrown branches scraped against the sides of my car, their scratching sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt, damp earth, and something else, the unmistakable odor of decay. And then I saw it. To call it a cabin was a kindness. Ruin was more accurate. It was a skeleton of a structure, hunched against the rocky shoreline as if bracing for a final, merciful blow from the sea. The roof sagged in the middle, like a broken back. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the ones that weren't were dark, vacant eyes. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving behind a patchwork of weathered, silver-grey wood. A stone chimney, choked with ivy, listed precariously to one side. Uncle Robert hadn't been joking. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. I parked the car and got out, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, the only greeting. I walked toward the cabin, my boots sinking into the soft, mossy ground. The front porch steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one carefully before putting my full pressure on it. The porch itself was swept clean, which struck me as odd. The wind should have covered it in leaves and debris. But I dismissed it, my mind too overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the dereliction. The key in the envelope was old, made of heavy, tarnished brass. It turned in the lock with a surprisingly smooth click. I pushed the door open, and it swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. Another strange detail: the air that rushed out to meet me was a physical presence, thick with the smell of mold, dead animals, and the deep, pervasive dampness that seeps into wood left too long by the sea. Inside, it was a disaster. Rain had clearly been getting in for years. Water stains bloomed like dark continents across the ceiling and walls. The floorboards were soft and spongy in places. Most of the furniture was gone, leaving only ghostly outlines in the dust. A single rickety table and a chair stood in the center of the main room, looking forlorn and abandoned. In the corner, a small wood-burning stove sat cold and rusted. Next to it, however, was a neatly stacked pile of firewood. It was dry. My training in architecture, the very thing my great-grandfather had mockingly referenced in his will, kicked in automatically. I started a mental assessment, a litany of failures. Foundation was likely compromised by the coastal erosion. The main support beams were probably rotten. The roof needed to be completely replaced. The electrical system, if it even existed, would be a death trap. The plumbing was a fantasy. To bring this place up to code would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money I didn't have. Money I would never have. I walked through the small, sad rooms, a tiny kitchen with a rusted sink, a bedroom where a portion of the ceiling had caved in, leaving a gaping hole to the sky. And at the back, a heavy wooden door that led, I assumed, to a root cellar. I tried the handle. It was locked. The lock was a heavy, modern-looking padlock, its steel shackle gleaming in the dim light, free of the rust that coated every other piece of metal in the house. It looked completely out of place. That night, I sat in the single chair, wrapped in a blanket from my car, and I finally hit my low point. The weight of it all came crashing down on me. The eviction, the humiliation at the lawyer's office, the crushing debt I had inherited, this rotting monument to my own failure. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. My great-grandfather hadn't just given me a liability. He had exiled me, banished me to the edge of the world to be forgotten. The sound of the waves outside wasn't soothing. It was mocking, a relentless reminder of the forces that were tearing this place and my life apart. I buried my face in my hands and cried, feeling utterly and completely defeated. For 3 days, I lived in a haze of despair. I slept in my car, unwilling to trust the cabin's roof over my head. I ate cold cans of beans and stale crackers, the last of my groceries. I spent my time walking the rocky beach, trying to figure out my next move. Declaring bankruptcy seemed like the only logical option. I could walk away from the cabin, the debt, all of it. But the thought of returning to the city with absolutely nothing, of having to face my relatives and admit they were right, was a different kind of ruin. On the 4th day, something shifted. Maybe it was the anger that finally burned through the fog of self-pity. Maybe it was just sheer boredom. But I decided that if I was going to abandon this place, I was at least going to understand it first. I was an architect, or I was training to be one. This rotting pile of wood was a problem, and I was a problem solver. I went back inside, not as a victim but as an investigator. I started with the anomalies, the little details that had pricked at the edge of my consciousness. The swept porch, the dry, neatly stacked firewood, the well-oiled door hinges, the modern padlock on the cellar door. Individually, they were oddities. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone had been here, recently, and they had been taking care of the place in small, subtle ways. My professional curiosity was piqued. I grabbed the old property survey from the manila envelope. It was a hand-drawn document from the 1940s, brittle with age. I found a rusty tape measure in one of the kitchen drawers and began the tedious process of measuring the cabin's exterior and interior dimensions, comparing them to the old survey. For hours I worked in the dusty silence, my mind focused, the numbers a welcome distraction from my bleak reality. Everything matched up. The main room, the kitchen, the bedroom. The dimensions were almost exact. It was frustrating. I was about to give up when I decided to measure the foundation from the outside, just to be thorough. I crawled under the sagging porch, fighting through cobwebs and the smell of damp earth, and began to measure the stone foundation wall that ran the length of the back of the cabin. And that's when I found it. According to the survey and my own interior measurements, the back wall of the cabin should have been a single, uninterrupted stretch of foundation, but my tape measure told a different story. There was a discrepancy. An 8-foot section of the foundation wall was unaccounted for on the inside. From the outside, the wall was continuous, but from the inside, that space simply didn't exist. It was hidden behind the back wall of the root cellar. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. An unaccounted-for space, a hidden room. It was the oldest trick in the architectural book, but here, in this forgotten place, it felt like a revelation. The padlock on the cellar door was now an infuriating obstacle. I had no bolt cutters. I spent an hour trying to pry it open with a tire iron from my car, my frustration mounting with each failed attempt. I was about to give up when I remembered the keys Mr. Thompson had given me. There had been 2. The large brass key for the front door, and a smaller, modern-looking silver key that I had assumed was for a shed or a mailbox. My hands shook as I retrieved it from the envelope. It looked like a standard key for a high-security padlock. I walked back to the cellar door, slid the key into the lock, and turned. It opened with a decisive, satisfying click. The padlock fell away into my hand. I took a deep breath, pulled the heavy door open, and was met with a rush of cool, musty air. Stone steps led down into the darkness. I used the flashlight on my phone to illuminate the way. The cellar was small, just as I'd expected, with stone walls and a hard-packed dirt floor. There were empty shelves lining one wall, coated in a thick layer of dust. I went straight to the back wall. It looked like all the others, a solid wall of fieldstone and mortar. I ran my hands over the cool, rough surface. I pushed. I knocked, listening for any hollow sounds. Nothing. It felt completely solid. My brief surge of adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by the familiar sting of disappointment. Maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe my measurements were wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling. 8 feet. Where did that space go? I looked closer at the wall, examining the mortar between the stones. Most of it was old, crumbling and grey. But in one section, running in a perfect rectangle about the size of a doorway, the mortar was slightly darker, harder and smoother. It was newer. Much newer. I focused on one of the stones in the centre of this rectangle. It seemed no different from the others, but as I ran my fingers along its edges, I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible groove along the bottom. It wasn't a natural crack. It was machined. I pushed on the stone, first gently, then with all my weight. Nothing happened. I tried to pull it. Still nothing. Then I remembered my great-grandfather's words in the will. In recognition of her purported interest in structure and form. It was a clue. He wasn't just mocking me. He was telling me to think like an architect. What would an architect do? They would look for the mechanism, the structural logic. I examined the stone again. The groove wasn't for pulling or pushing. It was for leverage. I took out my car key, a flat piece of metal, and slipped it into the groove. I levered it upwards. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low grinding sound of stone on stone, the rock tilted inwards, revealing a dark, square cavity behind it. Inside the cavity was not a handle or a lever, but a small steel keypad, the kind you would see on a modern safe. It was wired to something deep within the wall. My heart sank. A keypad. I would never guess the code. It was a dead end. I stared at it in frustration, my flashlight beam dancing over the numbers. Then I saw something else in the cavity, tucked into the corner behind the wiring. A small folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My fingers trembled as I carefully pulled it out and unfolded it. On it, in elegant, faded handwriting, were a date and a set of coordinates. The date was my birthday. The day, month, and year. I typed the 8 digits into the keypad. A small green light blinked on. For a long second, nothing happened. Then, a low hum vibrated through the stone floor. With a series of heavy pneumatic hisses, the entire section of newer mortar began to retract into the wall. The stones slid away, silent and smooth, revealing not a dusty, forgotten room, but the polished steel face of a vault door. I stood there, frozen, my flashlight beam trembling on the immense, circular handle. This was impossible. A high-security vault door, hidden inside a collapsing fishing cabin on the coast of Maine. It made no sense. I reached out and touched the cold, smooth steel. It was real. My great-grandfather had been a reclusive eccentric. Yes, but this was something else entirely. This was the work of a master planner, a man of incredible foresight and resources. I gripped the heavy handle with both hands and turned. It moved with a quiet, satisfying series of clicks, the tumblers falling into place. I pulled, and the massive door swung open, revealing the darkness within. The air that flowed out was different. It wasn't the damp, musty air of the cellar. It was cool, dry, and sterile, with a faint metallic tang. I stepped over the threshold, my phone's flashlight cutting a nervous path through the blackness. I fumbled along the wall just inside the door, searching for a light switch. My fingers found a simple, modern switch. I flicked it up, and the world changed. The room that flooded with light was enormous, easily the size of a small warehouse, carved out of the solid bedrock beneath the cabin. The walls were smooth, reinforced concrete, the floor a polished grey epoxy. Rows of industrial shelving stretched into the distance, and the air hummed with the quiet, constant thrum of a climate control system. But it was the contents of the room that stole my breath. To my left, parked in neat rows, were cars. Not just any cars. A silver 1961 Aston Martin DB4, a blood red 1957 Ferrari 250 Testarossa, a Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic, its black teardrop body gleaming under the fluorescent lights. There were at least a dozen others, each one a priceless piece of automotive history, all of them in pristine condition. My light swept past the cars to the shelves. They weren't filled with tools or old junk. They were filled with art. Canvases wrapped in protective plastic, stacked carefully. I saw a signature that looked like Pollock, another that looked like Rembrandt. There were sculptures on pedestals, ancient pottery sealed in glass cases. I walked deeper into the vault, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. I passed a section dedicated to rare books, with what looked like a Gutenberg Bible in a climate-controlled display. There were racks of rare wines and whiskies, the bottles dark with age. In another corner were wooden crates, dozens of them, stamped with dates from the 1950s and 60s. I pried one open with the tire iron. It was filled with gold coins, thousands of them, their soft, heavy gleam absorbing the light. I opened another. This one was filled with uncut diamonds, a cascade of raw, fiery brilliance. A third held nautical maps, hand-drawn on vellum, along with antique navigational tools of brass and wood. The scale of it was incomprehensible. This wasn't just a fortune. It was a nation's treasury. It was a king's ransom, hidden beneath a forgotten shack. I felt dizzy, my mind struggling to process the reality of what I was seeing. This was the worthless inheritance. This was the cruel joke. And in the very center of the vault, sitting on a simple wooden desk under a single focused lamp, was a leather-bound journal and a single sealed envelope. My name, Wren, was written on the front in that same elegant script. My legs felt weak as I walked to the desk and sat in the chair. With unsteady hands, I picked up the envelope, broke the wax seal, and began to read the letter that would explain everything. My dearest Wren, it began. If you are reading this, then I was right about you. I was right that beneath a quiet exterior lies a sharp mind, a resilient spirit, and an eye for detail. I am sorry we never had the chance to meet. My exile was a necessary one, but know that I kept track of you from afar. I saw you choose a difficult path, studying the bones and sinews of buildings, while your cousins chose the easier path of spending money they never earned. The words felt intimate, a voice from beyond the grave, speaking directly to me. I could almost feel his presence in the quiet, humming air of the vault. I imagine you are wondering about all this, the letter continued, and about the seemingly cruel trick I played on you and your relatives. Let me assure you it was no trick. It was a test, a final, definitive test of character. For decades, I watched my son and his children grow into creatures of pure avarice. They saw our family name not as a legacy, but as a brand. They saw our wealth not as a tool for creation, but as a means of consumption. They are hollow, Wren, and I could not, in good conscience, leave my life's work in their hands. So, I devised a plan, a great sorting. I converted the vast majority of my liquid and traceable assets into tangible, untraceable ones. The things you see around you, art, gold, cars, history, things of real, enduring value, and I hid them here, in this place of humble beginnings, protected by a series of locks that only a person with your specific mind could open. The key was never a key, but a way of thinking. You had to see the flaw in the design, the lie in the structure. Your relatives, for all their expensive education, would have seen only a rotting shack. They would have paid to have it bulldozed without a second thought. A cold fury began to mix with my shock. He was right. They would have destroyed it all, this incredible secret history, without a moment's hesitation. Which brings me to their inheritance, the letter went on, and I could almost hear the grim satisfaction in his tone. The assets I left them are not what they appear to be. They are poison pills, designed for the greedy. Your Uncle Robert's controlling shares are in a parent company I set up decades ago. What he doesn't know is that the company also holds the deeds to several defunct mining operations with colossal, undisclosed environmental cleanup liabilities and pension debts. The moment he formally claims ownership, those debts become his. He will be ruined. My jaw dropped. It was diabolical. Your cousin Marcus's penthouse and art collection are tied up in a similar trap. The paintings are forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. I sold the originals years ago and put the money into this vault. The apartment itself was purchased using a complex series of loans from shell corporations that are currently under federal investigation for fraud. When he tries to leverage or sell it, he will trigger an avalanche of legal and financial calamities. As for Clara, her substantial trust fund is domiciled in a country whose banking privacy laws were just recently rescinded. The fund is flagged for holding decades of undeclared capital gains. The tax bill alone will bankrupt her 3 times over. Their own greed will be the trigger. All they had to do was be patient, to investigate, to think, but they will not. They will rush to claim their prizes, and in doing so, they will spring their own traps. It was a masterpiece of karmic justice, orchestrated by a ghost. He had built a financial mousetrap, and my relatives were the mice, blinded by the scent of cheese. Everything in this vault, the final paragraph concluded, is now legally and untraceably yours. The deed to the land is clear, once the lien is paid. Use a few of the gold coins for that. They are untraceable. Mr. Thompson knows a part of this plan, but not all of it. He is a good man and can be trusted to help you with the legal practicalities. This is your legacy, Wren. Not just the wealth, but the freedom it provides. Build things, create. Live a life of substance. Do not make the same mistakes your relatives did. Be worthy of it. Your loving great-grandfather, Alistair. I set the letter down, my mind reeling. I felt a profound sense of connection to this man I'd never met, this eccentric puppeteer who had seen something in me that no one else had, not even myself. He hadn't just given me a fortune. He had given me validation. He'd given me a weapon. The first thing I did was walk over to the crate of gold coins. I lifted one out. It was heavy, its surface worn smooth with time. This single piece of metal was the key to my future. I slipped it into my pocket, the weight of it a reassuring presence. Then I walked out of the vault, closing the massive steel door behind me. I slid the stone back into place, the mechanism clicking shut with a sound of finality. My secret was safe. The next morning I drove to the nearest town. I found a pawn shop and sold the single gold coin. The shop owner's eyes widened when he saw it, but he asked no questions, simply counted out a thick stack of $100 bills. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. From there, I went directly to the county tax office. The clerk looked at me, a 20-year-old kid in dirty jeans, with skepticism when I said I was there to pay the lien on the Ashford property. Her skepticism turned to shock when I paid the entire $73,000 balance, in cash. With the deed now clear and in my name, I made my second call. To Mr. Thompson. I didn't tell him everything, just that I had found some valuable antiques in the cabin and wanted his advice on securing the property. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded pleased. He arranged for a discreet, private security firm to be at the cabin by nightfall. Over the next few weeks, the world began to change. As Alistair had predicted, my relatives' greed was their undoing. The financial news blogs began to whisper about a sudden crisis at Ashford Logistics. A catastrophic, previously unknown liability had emerged, cratering the stock price. Uncle Robert was facing shareholder lawsuits and federal inquiries. He was ruined. Next came the news about Marcus. A society page reported on the unfortunate legal troubles surrounding his new penthouse. There were mentions of federal marshals and asset seizure. His name became a cautionary tale, whispered at cocktail parties. Clara's downfall was the quietest, but just as complete. A brief notice in a financial paper mentioned a massive tax evasion case. Her assets were frozen, her reputation shattered. I read about their demise online, sitting in the one good chair in my cabin, a quiet sense of vindication settling over me. They had laughed at my inheritance. Now their inheritances had devoured them whole. With the property secure, I began the real work. I used Alistair's plans, which I found in his journal, to hire a team of the best architects and builders in the state. I didn't just want to restore the cabin. I wanted to resurrect it, to transform it into a testament to my great-grandfather's vision and my own. For months, the cove was filled with the sounds of construction. We reinforced the foundation, raised a new roof, and fitted the interior with warm wood and wide panes of glass that looked out onto the ocean. The rotting shack was slowly reborn as a magnificent coastal home, a seamless blend of rustic charm and modern architecture. The vault below remained my secret, untouched and secure. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was supervising the installation of the library shelves, a battered, unfamiliar car pulled up the newly gravelled driveway. 3 figures got out. Even from a distance, I recognized their slumped shoulders, their air of defeat. Uncle Robert, Marcus, and Clara. They looked older, smaller, their expensive clothes hanging on them like costumes they no longer had the right to wear. They trudged up the stone walkway to the new porch where I stood waiting. Their eyes took in the transformed house, the landscaped gardens, the clean lines and solid construction. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief and raw, bitter envy. "You," Uncle Robert said, his voice a hoarse croak. "You did this. You set us up." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, my expression calm. "That old man. He planned it all, didn't he?" Marcus spat, his face pale and drawn. "He gave you everything and used us to pay his debts. It was all for you." "He gave you exactly what you deserved," I said, my voice even and cold. "He knew you were too greedy and short-sighted to look a gift horse in the mouth. He gave you a test, and you all failed spectacularly." Clara began to cry, her sobs thin and pathetic. "Please, Wren," she begged, stepping forward. "We have nothing left. They took everything. We're family. You have to help us." Family. The word was acid on her tongue. The same family that had called me a charity case and laughed at my public humiliation. The same family that hadn't called me once in the months since, not until they needed something. I looked at their desperate, ruined faces. I felt no pity, only a profound, chilling sense of justice. I thought of their mocking words in the lawyer's office, the way they had revelled in my despair. I looked directly at Marcus. "If you need a little loan to cover the demolition costs of your lives," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "you just let me know." His face went white with fury and shame. Uncle Robert looked like I had struck him. Clara's sobs hitched in her throat. I held their gaze for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch. Then, without another word, I turned my back on them. I walked into my beautiful, solid home, the home I had built from the ashes of their greed. I closed the heavy oak door, and the latch clicked shut with a satisfying, final sound, locking them out of my life forever. The past was gone. My future was just beginning.